It's Monday, May 18th, 2015, and you're listening to Episode 2 of the VVN Music Podcast. My name's Roger Wink, and on today's show, we'll take a look at the top news of the week, talk with Bobby Hart of Boyce and Hart on his new memoir, take a look at the charts, past and present, and review the new releases of the week. Well, we decided to come back and do this again. Thanks to everybody for the great reaction to Episode 1. It helped move us along in lining up more guests and features with an aim to eventually move all of this to a weekly show. We're also looking for a few regular contributors for the show. If you have expertise in an area that would be of interest to our listeners, please drop us a line at vvnnetwork@gmail.com. Keep in mind that we only cover those artists who have been recording for 20 years or more when making a proposal. With that, let's take a look at the news of the week. The big story, of course, is the passing of B.B. King. There has never been and most likely will never be as great an ambassador for blues as B.B. He not only was a master musician, but he also had an amazing work ethic that would shame almost everybody out there. B.B. at one time played over 300 shows. That was back during the 50s. And even as far as the middle of this decade, he was still playing 100 shows a year. As a matter of fact, he played his last show just last fall. And that's when he started to go downhill with dehydration and so forth with his diabetes. And that's what led to his ultimate demise. Born Riley B. King, B.B. started his music career in the church and at 21 moved to Memphis with his cousin Bucka White. After playing with Sonny Boy Williamson on his radio show and eventually getting his own Memphis program, he finally went into the studio in 1949 where he cut his first record called Miss Martha King. 2 years later, B.B. had his first of 71 songs to make the R&B charts. The number one record, 3 O'Clock Blues. And over the years, he'd hit with classics like Please Love Me, Every Day I Have the Blues, Paying the Cost to Be the Boss, and probably his best-known song, The Thrill Is Gone. That last song came at a time in 1969 when King found new popularity, starting to tour with rock artists, including a stint opening for the Rolling Stones. King's a member of the Blues Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame. B.B. King was 89. 2 high-profile tours opened over the last 2 weeks. Bette Midler's Divine Intervention World Tour started May 8th in Florida, and while she managed to fit in most of her many hits, the tour is built around her latest album, It's the Girls. Her show is a great salute to the female vocal groups from the 40s to the 90s, with an emphasis on such 60s artists as the Ronettes, the Shirelles, the Exciters, the Marvelettes, and others. The standout, though, is her slow, touching take of TLC's Waterfalls, which she performs in the show. U2 opened their Innocence and Experience tour last Thursday night with a set list that included 7 of the 11 songs from their latest album, Songs of Innocence, but also dove all the way back to 2 from their 1980 debut, Boy. It was also opening night that guitarist The Edge found out that you probably should pay attention to where you're going when you're gazing off into the audience and playing your guitar, because he walked right off the stage of the runway and into the pit. He claims he was unhurt, except for maybe a little bit of his ego. In Las Vegas, Mariah Carey opened her number one's residency, taking the title of the show literally. She performed each of her Billboard Hot 100 chart toppers in chronological order over the evening, adding only her new single Infinity as the encore. In the 25 years since her debut, Carey has had 18 Hot 100 chart toppers, the most of any female artist, and putting her just 2 behind the Beatles, who have 20. Whether she'll ever be able to add to that total is kind of questionable. Her last album, the strangely titled Me, I Am Mariah, The Elusive Chanteuse, did not produce even a top 10 hit and is yet to sell 200,000 copies. Her first album to not go at least gold, which is indicative of selling 500,000 copies. Mariah releases her companion album to the show, Number One to Infinity, this coming Tuesday, and it'll be interesting to see how it sells. When people went to the county fair in Thousand Oaks, California last weekend, little did they know there was a surprise waiting for them. The entertainment listed Chevy Metal, a side band led by Foo Fighters drummer Taylor Hawkins. What they got was Chevy Metal plus Dave Grohl and Chris Shiflett for a full-out Foo Fighters show. The band played all covers for the crowd from artists like the Rolling Stones, Van Halen, Billy Joel, and Alice Cooper. As we mentioned last show, the articles that are read on VVN Music are often not those that are covered by most other media, and this week is a perfect example. With everything that's been going on in the world, including B.B. King and Benny King and all of these shows, the most read story of the week was on the passing of Lenny Cocco, the lead singer of the Chimes. The Chimes started in Brooklyn in 1957, and the group used tight vocal harmonies and concentrated on covers of older music. They only hit big once in 1961 with the song Once in a While, and had a second minor hit with Let's Fall in Love, but their popularity quickly faded when the British invasion hit the States. Cocco, though, resurrected the group numerous times over the years, and he was still performing the songs up until this past February. Based on the number of people who came to VVN Music to read of his death and the number of remembrances posted, it looks like his long-term hard work left an impression on many people. This week our guest is Bobby Hart. While most people remember Bobby from his hit records with Tommy Boyce, including I Wonder What She's Doing Tonight and You're Still My Favorite Girlfriend, Alice Long, his career has been much longer and had an even bigger impact as a songwriter. Before they were even hitmakers, Boyce and Hart wrote songs like Come a Little Bit Closer for Jay and the Americans, and Hart wrote with Teddy Randazzo and Bobby Weinstein the Little Anthony and the Imperials hit Hurt So Bad. Then, in the middle of the decade, Boyce and Hart were instrumental in developing the sound of the Monkees. They were already writing songs and recording demos for the new NBC television show before the actors had even been cast. And even after they were done with the show, they were a big part of the band's career, writing the theme song, Last Train to Clarksville, I'm Not Your Stepping Stone, Valerie, and many of the other songs recorded by the group. Bobby tells the story of his life in the business in his new book, Psychedelic Bubblegum, Boyce and Hart, the Monkees, and Turning Mayhem into Miracles. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
How did you come to the decision to write this at this particular point?
Well, it's just one of those things where you make your plans as you go along in life, and then the divine order of things just kind of tells you how it's really going to be. I've been thinking of doing a book for many years and jotting some things down, mainly because of the stories I get asked all the time for oldies radio interviews and things like that. And so I wrote a version of the book that I wasn't happy with, and I then I was asking around for maybe a co-writer. My friend Glenn Ballantyne, who runs an ad agency and he runs political campaigns and has a PR firm in Colorado. And he suggested a couple of people that I met with and didn't think they were right for a co-writer. And then we're having a long conversation once. He said, well, I write speeches for governors and I write ad copy every day, and I can help you with this if you want. And it just turned out to be the perfect match. I've known him for 50 years almost, and he has the same spiritual path as me, and had a great take on how we should tell my life story, and taught me a lot about writing, that kind of writing, because I came from 12 lines in a bridge, and also even in the radio interviews, you want to tell your stories in punchlines. And because they want onto the next one, they've only got 12 minutes or whatever it is. So he taught me how to actually open up a scene and describe what I was feeling and what it was looking like and feeling like and smelling like. And so it was a wonderful experience. We worked on this version of the book 6 years together.
Well, I was going to say that Mickey Dolenz wrote a really nice intro to the book for you.
Yes, he did.
And he mentioned that you are normally a fairly private person and that he learned a lot about your life just by reading the book. Did you find it hard to open up during the writing process?
Not at all. I just needed the template, I guess they call it. Once I saw how it was going to work, It wasn't hard at all. In fact, it was therapeutic, and it was a wonderful experience to be able to. There's a lot of research goes into it because the mind plays tricks. You think, well, this is how I think it happened, and then you do a little research and you think, well, no, that record wasn't even out yet before this. So all that comes into play, and then you start to see patterns in your life, and it was a wonderful experience. My sister, who just read the book, told me that she learned more about me from this book than she already knew.
What brought you to the decision to end the book in the early 80s?
Because a couple of reasons. The questions that I normally always get asked are almost always about the 60s. I continued writing, and I think my name is on something like 20, 21 or 20, 22 Monkey songs, but it's always also on 22 Partridge Family songs. I had top 10 hits in the 70s and 80s as well. But what I'm known for is 60s music, and so that I know there's interest in that, and also where are you going to stop it? My life is probably going to go on for a while. I'm hoping that it does. I feel like I've got a lot more to contribute. We don't want it to be open-ended. We wanted to, so we just decided my marriage would be a good place to. It was because of the confluence of my marriage and getting serious about my spiritual life. It just seemed like a good point to end it.
It seems that throughout the book that your spirituality played a major part in your life, even though you say that it grew more starting in the 80s and so on.
Right.
I'm sure that must have really helped you get through the rough road of the entertainment business and life in general.
It definitely did. And those are some of the patterns that I was just talking about, that you're not necessarily aware as you go through life day by day. And you don't see those patterns, so you stand back and look at it from a distance. And so that was kind of what led me to include my spiritual journey more than just talk about the music. Because I could see things that were helping me and mistakes that were taking me the other direction. And I think became more of not only just a desire, but more of a responsibility to try to share some of the things I had learned that might be helpful to others.
You were born in Texas, correct?
No, Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh, Arizona, okay. And a lot of your early exposure to music, it seemed like, came more from the country standpoint?
That's right. I didn't really appreciate what they were calling popular music in the first half of the 50s, before Elvis and doo-wop came in. It just seemed soulless to me, and so I turned to country radio, where I could identify with the storytelling and the emotion and the tricks that the singers were doing, not just the straight, beautiful tones that were being held by some very talented people, the Sinatra generation, but I just didn't click with it. And then when Elvis and all the rockabilly guys broke through, they were being played on the country stations before the pop stations. So that was just a perfect transition for me and my musical taste.
After you got out of the service, you moved to Los Angeles to try and become a singer, correct?
No, I came here to go to disc jockey school. So to go to Don Martin School of Radio in Hollywood, and I enrolled there, and that had been my dream for 8 or 10 years of my last years at home. Mainly because I was so shy in my early days that I figured, well, I could never. I just didn't occur to me that I could be a rock and roll singer. But I figured, well, I can sit in a darkened room somewhere and be a star. Nobody will see me, and I'll be a disc jockey. I loved the country jocks in Phoenix, and so that was my goal. But I got a job printing record labels my first week in Hollywood, and I used to walk down Vine Street on my way to work and way home every day, and I would pass a small recording studio, and it had a theater-style marquee out in front that said, "Come in and see what your voice sounds like. $10." So I got my nerve up on a Saturday, and I made a demo, and I was hooked from then on. I dropped out of disc jockey school, and I realized that that was my dream had morphed really quickly in Hollywood.
So you moved from wanting to be a disc jockey to wanting to be a singer. How did the songwriting part come about?
Well, after a few weeks or months at the recording studio, somebody was hanging around the studio said, I like what I'm hearing, and you ought to go down and see this record producer who's having pretty good luck getting his acts signed to record labels. So I did that, and I went to see Jesse Hodges, and he listened to my demo, and he said, you sound pretty good, kid, but all I'm looking for now is artists who have their own material. So go home and write some songs, and then come back and see me. So just because he told me to do it, I did, and made a few more demos and went back, and he signed me on the spot to his production company and was able to place me with a rockabilly label called Radio Records. Did
you meet Tommy Boyce while you were in Los Angeles?
I met him we're in my first year and a half in L.A., and he was the same as me. He was still living at home with his folks. He was my same age, 18, and he had affiliations with Jesse Hodges, so I used to see him around Jesse's office. But I actually met him at a demo studio where Jesse was doing a demo one Saturday, and Tommy was singing the demo for Jesse, and that was my first introduction to him.
He eventually moved to New York before you, correct?
Yeah, he got a break to go back and work for Dunes Records as a songwriter, and then finally, a couple or 2.5 years later, I got the opportunity to join him back in New York, and that's where we had our first hits together.
You had a number of minor hits with some artists, with Tommy, but then you also wrote Come a Little Bit Closer for Jay and the Americans.
It was with Tommy and Wes Farrell. We had Tommy, and our first chart record was Lazy Elsie Molly by Chubby Checker, and the same year we wrote Come a Little Bit Closer for Jay and the Americans, which I think went to number 3, something like that. So that was our first top tenor. And then I got a job so I was writing with Tommy in New York. It was the Tin Pan Alley days and the Brill Building and the cubicles, and that was just that was great for me, because just the energy and the air, I guess the number of people in the streets rushing down the streets, and it was not laid back like the West Coast and like Arizona had been, and we were in those cubicles every day writing, and had success right away together. And then I got a job working for Teddy Randazzo as a backup singer in Vegas and the Nevada Circuit and other places. And that's where I got the opportunity to write with him and another of his backup singers, Bobby Wilding. And we wrote Hurt So Bad the following year, I guess the same year, 64.
Did you and Tommy have any thoughts of recording at that point while you were working in the Brill Building, or were all of your efforts really put towards songwriting?
We had both gotten sidetracked into songwriting. Both always, our main goal was to be recording artists separately, not together. But those years back there, we were signed. I was signed also as an artist to Don Costa's company, an artist and a songwriter. And Tommy had a few records out while he was back east, and one of them hit the charts. I think I remember Carol, but he didn't have any real success. And most of our efforts were just, trying to survive. And we knew that we had honed our craft for six or 8 years already by now, and that we could probably write hit songs if we just buckled down every day and worked at it.
After all of these pop and rock hits that you had written and so forth, you also wrote the theme song for Days of Our Lives, which is something that probably most people may not realize about you. How did that come about?
Well, after the hits in New York, we were signed to Screen Gems Columbia Music, which was the Nevins Kirshner publishing company that was the hottest thing in music publishing at the time. They had a stable of writers that included Jerry King, Jerry Goffin, and Carole King, and Man and Wild, and Jeff Bear and Nellie Greenwich, and so many others. And so they had Kirshner sold, after the death of his partner, Nevins, he sold the whole operation to Columbia Pictures and Screen Gems TV, and they renamed it Screen Gems Columbia, and they opened up West Coast offices at that point and sent us back to California. So it was a wonderful opportunity for us because, number one, Lester Sill, the guy who was running the West Coast operations, was like a father to us and a real champion in our corner, getting us opportunities. And so he would send us out for these various music needs around the city. We would meet with different people, television and movie producers who were looking for music. And in this case, it was Ted and Betty Corday, a married couple who had a whole string of success in the daytime television arena, going way back to the radio soap operas. So they were coming up to producing a new soap called Days of Our Lives, and so we said, okay, we'll write you something. They told us what they wanted, basically, and we thought that what they were asking for, but they didn't like what we wrote. So we tried it again, and they thought that was even worse. So Tommy, at this point, was to me. We were in a demo studio recording, and Tommy said when he got the call from Lester that they turned down the second one, forget about this. These guys don't know what they want. We should be writing hit songs. We don't. What are we doing this for? So I said, okay, but how about this? There's a Hammond B3 organ sitting over there across the studio. I'll just go over there and I'll play whatever comes to mind that reminds me of what I used to hear when my mother would listen to her radio soaps. It sounds like soap opera music. And just roll the tape. And so that's what we did, and that's what's been on the air for over 50 years, 5 days a week.
Was that one of the first points where you fell in love with the Hammond?
Well, I got my first Hammond lesson when I was, I would say, about 15 maybe or so. I went with my mother and father on a road trip from Phoenix to Lubbock, Texas for a revival meeting for a week. And during that time, I saw this lady on stage playing the heck out of this Hammond B3. And I just loved what she was doing, and my folks arranged for me to have a couple lessons while I was in town that week, maybe 3 lessons. And I loved that. And when I came back to Phoenix, I was asked to play for church, various. My folks went to one church, and my girlfriend went to another church, so I was back and forth, and I'd be playing in those services.
I was going to ask you how you got involved with the early development of the Monkees, but it appeared that it was basically in the same house as Days of Our Lives. Was it that you were known there, and that's how you got the initial call to work on the development of the show?
We were known a little bit by now, but mainly it was because the main operation of Nevins Kirshner had always been in New York, and that's where Donnie Kirshner still was, and the bulk of his writing stable. And so they were getting all of the, most of the requests that were coming in from the East Coast artists. But we had this little outpost in Hollywood, and there weren't that many writers out here. And so we were getting opportunities to not have to compete for those records that, maybe Righteous Brothers would be coming up, and Donnie would say, we need a song for the Righteous Brothers by a week from Thursday. Well, you got Carole King in one booth, and you got Barry Mann in the next booth, and they're all competing for that project. And it worked out great. That was a great system for him back there. Out here, not so much. Lester would often just say, go over and see these people or those people, and that's what happened with the Monkees. We walked in and on the Columbia lot and met with Bert Schneider, who told us we're going to do a new television show. It's basically an American Beatles on television, stylistically. Not that the music should sound like that, but we do need 3 songs for the pilot. Tommy and I just could see immediately this is great, because to combine television exposure for selling records, we knew that was always a winning proposition. So we convinced them, mainly Tommy, who was the salesman of the duo, that we were the guys that knew how to do this. And so we were commissioned to do the songs for the pilot and to produce their records. Then so he did the pilot with the 4 guys lip syncing to our demos of Tommy and me singing the 3 songs. And but at that point, when it was sold, and that they had RCA Records on board for releasing records. They had NBC for the TV show. They had Kellogg's and Yardley for the sponsors. Then, for the first time, Donnie Kirshner got involved, and for the first time came out to see what was going on with the Monkees situation. And he called us into the office, his office, which we had our offices down the hall, and he told us, "No, you guys have had hits as songwriters, but not as record producers. So I'm going to have to go with the high-profile guys, and this is too important." So we were off the project that we'd been working on for over a year, planning and making formulas and figuring out what the sound should be and what it should look like. So we were pretty devastated for a few weeks, but we didn't give up, and we knew that we were right for this project. And after Donnie had tried at least 3 high-profile record producers of the day, he didn't like the product that was coming back to him. So we were getting this feedback from Lester Sill, and so we caught Donnie one day in his office and said, "Look, here's the deal. I work at Moonlight at night, playing small clubs around L.A. And so we'll take Bobby's band into the little rehearsal studio down the street, and we'll work up arrangements on 2 or 3 songs. You come down. It costs $10 an hour for the studio. It costs you $20, and a half hour of your time. And if you like what you hear, give us our project back. And if you don't, we won't bother you." And he came down. He was blown away by what he heard, and we were back on the project.
The actual recordings on the first Monkees album, those were your original demos, except with your vocals removed and the actors' voices or singing voices put on instead, correct?
Well, these were master recordings once we got our project back. Then we went into the big RCA studios and had access to the top engineers. But yes, we worked that way because of an experience that we had when we were asked to get the Monkees' voices on our tracks for the pilot show before the show was sold. And so the 4 Monkees showed up on time, all together, and that's where we actually met them for the first time, in the demo studio. So we greeted them and hung out with them in the studio a bit and joked around, and they were full of energy and bouncing off the walls. And we said, "Look, here, you guys have copies of the lyrics, and you've had demos of the songs, so you know the songs. Put your phones on, and let's try a take." And I don't know what we thought we were going to get. I guess we were going to just record all 4 voices singing the songs. So we went back in the control room and said, "Take 1," and nothing was coming on. We got past the intro, nobody was singing. So we looked out and we saw they were still clowning around, basically ignoring us. So about the 3rd time this happened, we looked out and they were like in a dog pile on the floor, wrestling, and we just went out and dismissed the session, and Tommy and I made a vow that we would never bring more than one of the guys into the studio at a time. So that's how we worked once we got our project back. We laid down the tracks using my band, which gave a more legitimate garage band sound than just using the Wrecking Crew, the LA studio guys, who were great, and which we used on most of our other productions. But for this, we really wanted it to sound like a young band. So we used Louis Shelton and Jerry McGee and Wayne Irwin on guitars and Billy Lewis on drums and Larry Taylor on the bass, and then I would do keyboards and Tommy would do acoustics and percussion, whatever. So we'd have all the instrumental tracks done, and then Tommy and I would do the background vocals. And so when we would get one of the guys, we'd send over Mickey maybe at 10 at night because they were working 12-hour days shooting the show. So we'd get Davey or Mickey, one or the other usually, and teach them the song quickly and get their voices on, and that would be the finished product.
Do any of the tapes still exist of you and Tommy performing the songs?
There are demo versions, yes, but not so much on the master recordings. There are demo versions. In fact, Rhino released a collection a couple of years ago called Where the Action Is, that one of the cuts was Tommy and I singing our demoed version of Words, the song that we later recorded with the Monkees.
Was there any consideration at any time of you actually auditioning for any of the roles on the show? I know later they tried to build a show around you and have you act in it. Was there any thought of it early on with the Monkees?
Not that I know of. Tommy saw it as a possible opportunity, but mostly in his own mind. I don't think anybody else was looking to that, because they knew they had now hired us to do the recordings, and they knew that they had to have their guys on set, and they needed somebody else making the records at the same time. So it didn't really make a lot of sense. They needed us where we were.
You only worked on the show directly for one season.
We only recorded, we recorded enough material probably to make 2 albums, but it turned out to come out to be the first album, and then a couple of cuts on the second album. And then after that was the Monkees took over their careers and got rid of Kirshner, and the decree was that only Monkey-produced records could be released. So the guys were kind enough to continue to use our material after that, and we had songs on every Monkey album except for the soundtrack to the movie that they later did.
How did you get signed to A&M Records?
Well, that kind of tied in with what I just said. Once they decided they didn't want to take control of their recording careers, it was a perfect opportunity for Tommy and I to accept, or at least talk to some of the labels that had been offering us recording careers. I had kind of not taken it seriously because of the diversity in styles that Tommy and I had. I was more R&B influenced, and he was more pop bubblegum, and I never took it seriously that we should record together. But we were now getting all this publicity as the guys behind the Monkees, and all this fan club coverage, and so there was this interest. And once the Monkees said, "Hey, we want to produce ourselves now," then it was the perfect opportunity for us to accept an offer from the A&M Records and become recording artists.
I'm thinking that those years from about 1967 to 1969 were probably the busiest of your career, between recording, touring, and then you managed to make appearances on a number of television shows like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie. Was that all through your relationship with, I think you said Screen Gems?
Yes, it was. Well, yes, we hired a new manager who was really something else. He was he thought big, and he was able to pull things off, very charismatic, and so we took him on board just about the time that our contract was up for renewal with Screen Gems. And so he renegotiated for us, and instead of talking to the music publishing people, Lester and that office, he went over to the Columbia lot and negotiated with the top brass over there, and was able to pull off a contract where we would continue to write songs, but they would give us our own record label distributed by Bell Records, which they owned. So we could, and they would give us budgets to record other people that we wanted to produce, and we would record for our own label, and then they gave us a development deal for a television show on Screen Gems television. So it was going to be a sitcom that would go on probably in the fall of 1970. So that's what all the stuff that led up to that, the television guest starring roles that we did on I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched and Flying Nun, and all those came about because they wanted to give us experience they put us on all the sitcoms that they had running at that time.
So you were appearing on shows, you were in development for a new show, and then all of a sudden Tommy decided that it was time to leave the business.
Yeah. It was a very surprising thing, probably to himself too, but to everybody around. There was a setback because of a betrayal of this manager at one point. He had done tremendous things for us, but he did something that required him to leave his position. And Tommy was kind of blown away by it. He kind of really had seen him as our champion, our Colonel Tom Parker, or kind of more of a father figure for Tommy as well. really blew his mind when that happened, and details in the book, but I won't go into all of it. But he decided, he didn't want to do it anymore. So we had a hit Las Vegas show that we had just finished with Zsa Zsa Gabor, and offers to go back to the Flamingo in Vegas and offers to take the show to Europe. We had a television show coming on the following year. We had our own record company. We had a thriving recording career. It was just all over in a snap, because once if it's a duo and one guy quits, it's pretty much the end of the duo.
What did you do with your life for, I guess it was about the next 4 to 5 years before you got back together with Mickey Dolenz and Davy Jones and Tommy?
I continued right where basically what I had been doing. Obviously, we didn't have the television show. It was turned into a show starring Bobby Sherman. I can't remember the name of it, but
well, I think it was Getting Together,
right.
wasn't
That's it? So that's what happened to that. The Partridge Family would have been a project that Tommy and I produced, so that didn't happen, of course. When we went with Screen Gems anymore, Wes Farrell produced those records. But as I mentioned before, Wes and I had written and were good friends, and so we wrote together. And my main writing partner for the first half of the 70s was Danny Jansen, who had hits with Bobby Sherman. So we started writing, and I think we wrote 22 songs for the Partridge Family. And Wes kept us busy in the studio producing, so in return for those production projects for his label and others, we gave him the publishing for those songs in the 70s. But we had a hit with top 10 hit with Austin Roberts called Something's Wrong With Me, and we had a top 10 hit with Helen Reddy called Keep On Singing. And we did a lot of television work. We did Sigmund and the Sea Monsters television series. I think 10 or 12 songs for that. We did 10 or 12 songs for a Saturday morning version of I don't know now. It was a Monkeys with Partridge Family, but there's a Saturday morning version that we did a whole series of stuff for. And we produced others. We produced Vicky Carr, 2 albums, and several other recording artists. So we really kept busy during those 5 years. And then at the end of that, Danny was getting more interested in investing his money and in the real estate projects and so on. And that's when the Dolenz Jones Boyce and Hart thing came about. So it was a perfect transition again.
You recorded one studio album and one live album with that particular group, correct?
Yeah, we got signed to 1975. My friend Christian de Walden, who was an entrepreneur in the music business and a promoter and traveled the world all the time, he came back. He said, I just got back from Thailand, and we'd like to hire the Monkees to perform over there for some concerts. Would you call Mickey up and see what's up with the guys? So Mickey told me no, Michael wasn't interested in being part of the Monkees at that point, and that Peter they hadn't been in touch with at all for a year or more. So I gave the information to my friend Christian, and he said, well, why don't you and Tommy go out with Mickey and Davy? So we met, Tommy, Mickey, Davy, and I met, and we decided, well, okay, if they want us, and we'll give it a shot. So while we were waiting for the Southeast Asian tour, which Christian added on to Thailand, Hong Kong, and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and Singapore, and Taipei, and I may be missing one. Anyway, Japan. We had a week and a half in Japan in various cities. We were waiting for that tour, which is a year off. We got booked by another artist representative to play all over the country domestically. And then our attorney, Abe Summer, went to Capitol, and they signed us immediately to be one of their artists. And we did the studio album. But unfortunately, the week that the studio album was coming out, the fellow who signed us jumped ship from Capitol and went over to run RSO Records. And And so there was no promotion for that, which was really a good album. But then on our Japanese tour, our Southeast Asian tour, we recorded some of the shows live, and that became a second album.
I've heard so many stories from different artists of what exactly happened to you, where they've recorded this album and then something happens. Either the record company goes bankrupt or the group Big Star during the 70s had two albums which are now considered classics, and in both cases they never really got out to the public because of the failure of the record company or of people within the record company in some way, and it's a real shame that happens.
It is. It's to have giant success, let's say on the magnitude of the Monkees, who nobody was really expecting, I think, except Tommy and I. Maybe we could see the potential right away, and maybe the two producers of the show. But even they were blown away by what happened when the Monkees hit the airwaves and started touring and became an actual band who could play their own instruments and go out and tour. That kind of success, the stars really have to align, don't they? I mean, so many things have to just be in the right place at the right time, and that's more of an anomaly than the rule. That's why we hear all these stories about this part was great. The album was sounding wonderful, but the record company wasn't there for it, or the radio stations had some problem with playing it, or the band broke up just before we were ready to go on tour. So there's all those elements to get really giant success. Even the kind of success that Tommy and I had, all the elements have to be in place, and for that particular program, it just wasn't there.
When that project came to an end, that was the last time that you worked with Tommy?
Except for an occasional appearance. I think the last time the only times we performed together after Dolan Jones' Boyce and Hart would have been Monkees conventions and things like that. I know we sang together in New Jersey in the early 80s, and the last time I performed with Tommy was at the Chicago Monkey Convention, which would have been around 1990 or 91.
You, right around the late 70s, you formed your own band and recorded a solo album.
I did.
Gratifying experience or frustrating?
No, it was fun to do. It just because of all those years of visualizing myself as a solo recording artist. I said, well, I really never did that, even with Boyce and Hart and the three albums we had on A&M. And I sang lead on some of them, but it wasn't the same as just doing a Bobby Hart album. So I had the opportunity and the wherewithal at that point to do it, and I had a great time doing it. It was never released in this country, as far as I know. It came out in Europe mainly.
It's amazing how much the European audiences seem to take to artists that have been around for a while. I mean, there are so many artists that have gone and have very, very successful careers in Europe and just never find it here in the United States.
It's true. Some guys that I worked with in the mid-'60s, Scott Ingle and John Walker. He became John Walker. He was John Moss, and they couldn't get arrested here, but they went to England, and they hooked up with another guy who I think was also American, and became the Walker Brothers, and had tremendous success in England, and they even had 2 or 3 real big hits over here.
In 1980, you were nominated for an Academy Award for a song from the movie Tender Mercies. Had you been working much in film, or how did that come about?
I was writing with a fellow named Austin Roberts, who I mentioned earlier, and a number of others at that point. Austin was still signed to newly signed to Screen Gems Columbia Music as a writer for that publishing company. I think it was probably the movie was maybe a Columbia picture, and so it was the song. The song got in that movie through the auspices of Screen Gems.
As I mentioned earlier, you ended the book right around that time in the early '80s. What have you done since that time?
I continued through the 80s. I wrote mostly with a guy named Dick Eastman, and we had some success, and we had a song on the Monkey album that came out, the 20-year revival in 1986, when they became the highest-grossing touring act of that year. The Monkees were hot again, and Arista, Clive Davis, recorded 2 new songs to go in a repackage of their hits. The LP was called That Was Then, This Is Now, and Dick and I had a song in that. We produced a record with LaToya Jackson that did well in Europe. We co-wrote a song called Dominoes, which was top 10 for a fellow named Robbie Neville. It was his follow-up to a song called C'est la vie, maybe 86, something like that. So we were pretty productive during those years. And then in the 90s, I started really spending more time doing volunteer work at my church and administering my publishing company and laying back from performing and recording that much.
Any plans for going out and promoting the book as far as book signings and so forth?
Yeah, we've been doing it. We're gonna do one in Los Angeles on the 19th, coming up next week on Tuesday at the Barnes & Noble in Studio City. The next day, we have a screening at the Grammy Museum of the Boyce and Hart documentary called The Guys Who Wrote 'Em. The title came from Dolan Jones, Boyce and Hart. When we went out to be artists and to perform, we couldn't actually use the Monkees without licensing it and paying them a big chunk of what small money we were making. So we billed it as Dolan Jones, Boyce and Hart, the guys who sang them and the guys who wrote them. So they called this documentary about Boyce and Hart, the guys who wrote them. And we'll be screening that and signing books at the Grammy Museum. It's sold out, but it will be there on Wednesday, the 20th. And then we go to New York, and we'll be signing at the independent store called Book Court on I believe it's on the 30th. We're doing an appearance at Steinway Hall. We'll be talking a little bit, my co-writer and I, Glenn Valentine, and signing Steinway Hall on the 29th. And then that night we'll be doing another screening of the documentary and signing in Jersey City at the WFMU theater called Monty Hall. It holds about 300 people. And then we'll be doing television and radio and other media promotion for the book that week in New York and then back here.
From what I've seen, it seems that you've stayed fairly close with Tommy's widow, at least on a business standpoint. She has done a lot to keep the Boyce and Hart name in front of the fans.
She has. She's been terrific for the last 15 years. And when Tommy died, she knew nothing about the record business. She went to Bell University in Nashville and learned about administrating his publishing catalog and then just taught herself social media, and so she's been just great with the Facebook page and the website for Boyce and Hart. And she's helping us a lot with the promotion of the book, getting the word out, and the fans have been unbelievable. I mean, I don't think any of us expected the reception that we've been getting. For most of the last month on Amazon's hot new releases in the field of pop biographies, we've been number one, and that's because of the Monkey Boyce and Hart fans out there that have been reached since the book has come out. Actually, before the book has come out, the book only came out 2 days ago, but these were all pre-sales. Even the publisher was a little stunned, to see those number ones popping up every day. But how are you guys doing that? Well, we're not doing it. The fans are doing that, and I didn't know that would be happening, but it's been a wonderful surprise, and we're very grateful, both Glenn Valentine and myself.
Well, it's a fascinating book, and there are so many stories that obviously we haven't talked about here today that are included in the book that I think fans of the Monkees and Boyce and Hart, and I think just music fans in general, are going to find fascinating.
Well, thank you. That's very nice, and I hope that's true. It seems to be true from the reports we're getting back. So we want to make it available to as many people as possible. You were talking about Europe, and I guess because of the Monkees' universality, when the show was on originally all over the world, and still popular in reruns in most of the world. And so there's a surprising effort from there coming back, that we have a music we have a book publisher in the UK now. And when I did a BBC interview the other day, the guy said, "Well, I just bought your book at the store, and it's not even out in the States yet." I don't know how that happened, but that's how I found out we had a publisher over there. So through the U.S. publisher, I guess they had licensed it. And it's great to see orders coming in from Australia and from Japan and all over the world on pre-orders on Amazon. So it's terrific, and I'm, like I said, very grateful.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us today, and I do wish you the very, very best with the book.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and all the best to you as well, Roger, and maybe we'll talk again.
Our thanks to Bobby Hart for the interview. It was one of the worst weeks in recent memory on the U.S. charts for veteran artists, as only one, Reba McEntire, was able to place an album in Billboard's top 40. Even just outside of the top 40, the best sellers by older artists were two albums from the 90s by Nirvana. As a matter of fact, only two veteran artists placed new albums in the entire top 200, jazz great Boney James at 76 with Future Soul, and Latin singer-songwriter Alejandro Sanz at 83 with Soropa. And I certainly hope I pronounced that one correctly. Over in Britain, Paul Simon's The Ultimate Collection moves back up to number 5, while Eric Clapton has the highest charting new album of the week at number 8 with the compilation Forever Man. Let's go back 50 years where, on this date in 1965, Herman's Hermits were at number 1 in the U.S. for a third week with Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter. You know, Herman's Hermits are generally not given credit for being one of the biggest hitmakers of the British invasion. And maybe it's because they weren't overly rock like the Stones or the Who, but the fact is, they had 11 top 10 hits between 1965 and 1967, and Mrs. Brown was one of their 2 number ones. On the U.S. album chart on this day in 1965, the number 1 album was the soundtrack from Mary Poppins, which would eventually total 14 weeks at number 1. Over in England, the number 1 single was Manfred Mann and Pretty Flamingo, while the number 1 album was Bob Dylan's The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Jumping ahead to 1985, the number 1 single in the U.S. was Simple Minds' Don't You Forget About Me from the movie The Breakfast Club, and the number 1 album was Phil Collins' No Jacket Required. In the UK, the top single was Paul Hardcastle's 19, a position it would hold for the next 5 weeks, and on the album chart, it was the 6th and final week at the top for the Hits Album 2, a bit of a precursor to the current Now series of various artists' albums, which here in the States have reached over 50 volumes, but over in England, they have had over 100 releases in the series. Among the new releases hitting the shelves and download sites next week are the previously mentioned Hit Set from Mariah Carey, plus Faith No More's first studio album in 18 years, Sol Invictus, Sammy Hagar's At Your Service with his band The Circle, which includes Michael Anthony and Jason Bonham, Graham Parker and the Rumors' Mystery Glue, Paul Weller's Saturn's Patterns, and Whitesnake's Deep Purple cover set, The Purple Album. On the reissue front, look for the 4-CD set, The Atlantic Recordings by Percy Sledge, and an expanded version of Brian Wilson's self-titled 1988 solo album. Once again, we're at the end of another VVN Music Podcast. For the latest news on the veteran artists of rock, pop, soul, country, folk, and blues, check in at vvnmusic.com. And if you have any comments or questions about the website or this podcast, please send them to vvnnetwork@gmail.com. Our theme music is performed by Yahar. The VVN Music Podcast is a production of the VVN Network and is copyright 2015.